one of the lessons of the crisis the need for greater international financial regulation?
Trade has been regulated by the WTO. You had a financial system which was not regulated. So in the US, you can do something. In France, you can do something. In the European Union, you can do something. You can come to the Middle East and do something. And I think we need to have a uniform global financial regulatory system which is applicable to all countries. So, because we must recognize that while financial systems are not interdependent, financial systems in the world are interconnected. And this interconnection puts into jeopardy, puts into risk the global financial system as we are seeing now.
The G20 is meeting in London in early April. Is that a good thing? Is that part of the changing world?
Well, yes, I think the G20 is now setting its sights on regulation also. But while we do that, from the last time the G20 met in November till now, things have even got worse. What does that mean? Does it mean that the G20 couldn't lock its horns? What is the issue? So what I think is that first the G20 must address the issue of getting the economic machinery working. There's no use of putting money into a bank to make it survive. A bank should not merely survive, it should be lending. If it's not lending and you're putting money in just for its survival, it's better to make it into a hotel or a restaurant instead of trying to keep it as a bank which cannot lend. That is what we've got to do. I think the G20 must address this issue, that how do we start the economic machine moving?
You're one of the leading players in the global trade debate, global economic policy circles. Is there a risk of more protectionism? Is that a real risk, or is that an exaggerated fear?
I think it's a risk, and because instinctively, when you see jobs being lost, you want to instinctively protect your jobs. That means you've got to be trade protectionist. But this then negates, this is the antithesis of globalization. And globalization has led to the economic gains of the last 2 decades. So it's very important that we don't move into protectionism mode, because a protectionism mode is not going to, in the long term, serve the interests of that particular country.
Because of the global economic situation, India's GDP growth has slowed from about 8 or 9% to about 5 or 6%. Is expected to continue at that rate this year. Is that a crisis, or is that just a temporary setback for India?
Well, with the integrated world today, no economy is insulated. We are not interdependent, but we are not insulated. We are interconnected. And I don't think for us the hit is as much as of other countries whose GDP growth is so largely export dependent. Our growth was domestic market driven. And that is what is going to hold us in good stead. I still believe that we'll be closer to 7% in GDP the current year.
We have an election coming up in April. It's the world's biggest democracy in action. What should international investors think about the risks of Indian politics and the Indian election?
Despite having 6 governments and 5 prime ministers in the last 15 years, we've had one policy in one direction, that is upwards. There's been just one economic policy. So for investors, I think the resilience of Indian democracy has been established. And once that has been established, there's a confidence in democracy as an institution in India, not democracy as a facade. It's at risk when democracy is a facade. In India, democracy is not a facade, it's an institution. And nobody challenges. Every transition which has taken place between governments has been a smooth transition, has been an orderly transition, and that's what investors should look at. So in a due diligence, I think India should score very high.